Hi, my name is Dr. Shipangi Kakkar, and I'm going to be talking about European regulatory and licensing systems in bio or pharmaceutical industries. So, a bit background about why it's important to have your marketing authorizations or the licensings in for all the medicinal products. It's because of the European Union law, which is in place from 1965, which requires any EU member state to have a marketing authorizations before it can put any drug into the EU market. So there are four different types of European authorizations or registration procedures based on where you want to sell your medicines. So the first or the foremost where you can use your market authorization for all the member states is centralized procedure, which is performed by European Commission. And there are other three types of procedures where, like national procedure, mutual recognition procedure, decentralized procedure, which are performed by member state, and it limits your market to only few member states for which you apply your recognition for, like authorization for. And but one thing you need to remember that in all of these there are same legal requirements that are followed for all the authorizations, and all of them are granted on the basis of quality, safety, and efficacy. Talking first about the centralized procedure. The centralized procedure allows applicants to obtain a single marketing authorization that is valid in all EU member states as well as in the European Economic Area countries like Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway. The application is made directly to the EMA and are scientifically evaluated by appropriate EMA committees. So we'll talk about the EMA committees in the next slide. And when do we do the centralized procedure? Is basically because you have to, and it falls under the mandatory scope of centralized procedure, which comes under the Article 3.1 of the regulation number 726 oblique 2004. And when it has to when it is you have to do it is basically uh, when you have medicines which are of advanced therapy medicinal products such as gene therapy, somatic cell therapy, orphan medicines which are like rare disease medicines, and medicines derived from biotechnological processes such as genetic engineering and biosimilar products. And also when it's a new substance for AIDS, cancer, neurodegenerative disorder, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and other autoimmune dysfunction and viral diseases. In those cases, you have to go for centralized procedure. And again, when your medicine falls into the optional scope of centralized procedure, then you have to go for centralized procedure, which comes under the Article 3.2 of Regulation EC number 726 oblique 2004, which states that if it's a new medicine, new active substance for indications other than what comes in your mandatory scope, and if it's a significant therapeutic, scientific, or technical innovation, if it's a generics of products approved by centralized procedure only, and finally, if it's a pediatric use marketing authorization, then you have to go for centralized procedure. And finally, regardless of whether the product falls into mandatory or optional scope, an eligibility request must be submitted ahead of filing marketing authorization application to EMA using the specific form and accompanied by a justification of eligibility. So you have to give eligibility request before you go for centralized procedure. So what is EMA? EMA is your European Medicines Agency, which is a scientific body with the expertise required to access the benefits and risks of the medicines. However, it has no authority to permit you the marketing authorities for any of the medicines. It just gives a recommendation to EU Commission decision, and then finally the EU Commission makes the decision on the marketing authority. Basically, EMA, how I said, is just responsible for protecting and promoting public and animal health through evaluation and supervision of medicines for human and veterinary use. Under EMA, there are seven different kind of committees, and which are divided on the basis of the type of medicines or the products that comes out, like if it's a advanced therapy, if it's for veterinary use, if it's for medicinal use, like human medicines or herbal medicine. So they have seven different kind of committees, and each of these committee contains members nominated by the national competent authorities like HPRA in Ireland. And the basic or the most important committee when we're talking about human use is Committee for Medicinal Products for Human Use, which is CHMP, and it has five different functions. So first is to monitor the safety of the authorized medicines. So that comes after your MMA is given. Before the MMA is given, the major or the main function of this authority is to scientifically assess the new medicine. So that's before your EMA, and then it also gives provision of advice to companies developing medicines. So that comes in your research and development stage when you're actually starting with the product. And it also helps in preparation of scientific and regulatory guidelines for industry. So that is when your industry is set up. And it also helps working with the international agencies to harmonize approaches. So that comes when important decisions are made on some of the medicines. But in this, when we talk about the new medicines, it's a scientific assessment, and under when it's doing the scientific assessment, they have 28 national agencies who each appoint a member and an alternate. So basically, if we are in Ireland and we have a marketing authority, and so the 28 national agencies would be from one from France. So if you have HPRA from Ireland, so the one person would be from that, and then the other person would be from the National Agency of France, and another from National Agency of Netherlands. So on. So there will be 28 people when we are having the scientific assessment of the new medicines. So moving on, what's the overview of the path for marketing authorization approval looks like? So first stage is your research development stage. So which is several years before your marketing authorization is actually in practice. So it'll be like maybe 5 to 7 years before that, maybe 10 years. Then the next step where you actually start your marketing authorization is 18 months before your marketing authorization, which is a pre-submission stage. And the next stage would be, again, of course, it's a submission and validation of your marketing authorization. And after that, you have evaluation, which is like 1 year before your marketing authorization is given. Then comes the role of EMA, and EMA gives the opinion or the recommendation to the EU Commission decision. And then finally, EU Commission decision is given, and uh, once it's given, then your market authorization is given to the company or like anybody who's applying. So it'll always research development, pre-submission, submission and validation, evaluation. The EMA gives the opinion, and the EU Commission gives a decision, but then your marketing authorization comes out. Moving on, there are two different special types of marketing authorization approvals. So first is a conditional marketing authorization. In the case of certain categories like medicinal products, in order to meet unmet medical needs of patients and in the interest of public health, it may be necessary to grant marketing authorization on the basis of less complete data. So there can be places where you have illnesses which are rare, and you don't have people that number of people who have that kind of disease, or those can actually go in your research phase or the phase 3 where the human trials are run. So if you don't have people for that, it may come under conditional MAA. So for this kind of marketing authorization, it can be for a seriously debilitating or life-threatening diseases. Again, we don't have people for human trials, so in those cases less number of data is also fine. The another category could be medicinal products to be used in emergency situations, and the third phase is your orphan medicinal product. So once the post approval commitments are fulfilled, the license will become a normal one, and there is an annual renewal for this license. So at the moment, if we talk about COVID situation, so that's an emergency situation. In those cases, we have data, we have people. It's just we don't have a lot of years of data. So in those cases, it's fine. So another type of marketing authorization can be exceptional circumstances, products for which the applicant can demonstrate that comprehensive data cannot be provided might be eligible for marketing authorization under exceptional circumstances. Justification for submission under exceptional circumstances can be inability to provide comprehensive efficacy and safety data due to rarity of the indication, inability to provide comprehensive efficacy and safety data due to present state of scientific knowledge. Example, like certain diagnostic tools have not yet been developed in order to specifically study the defined patient populations, or inability to collect such information because it would be contrary to medical ethics. So in those cases, it's an exceptional case. So COVID case, as I said, it would be like a conditional case. It's an emergency case. So those kind of situations, you have like special types of marketing authorizations. Then we have EU accelerated assessment as well. So if you have submitted your marketing authorization and you need acceleration on your marketing authorization process, you can have that. So the qualifying criteria for this is the medicinal product expected to be of major public health interest, justified on a case by case basis. If there are unmet medical needs, there has been extent to which the product will add value or address to the unmet medical needs, or the outline of data available for basis of claim of being a major public health interest, like again COVID situations. So we can have accelerated marketing authorization in such cases. The time limit for assessment is reduced from 210 to 150 days. So if the normal marketing authorization process takes 210 days, it'll be moved to 150 days in such cases. So how it is done is basically a request for accelerated assessment should be given at least 2-3 months before submitting the marketing authorization, and then before submitting the request application, applicants should seek guidance from EMA, and this would be the focus of the pre-submission meeting. So basically you go to EMA and you take the guidance from them, and then you present that guidance. That we had a discussion with EMA, and this is how they have suggested, or that's what they have to say on the drug. And then this is basically done 6 to 7 months before submissions. And under the prime scheme, applicants receive confirmation during the clinical development phase that their medicine might potentially be eligible for accelerated assessment. So it's not mandatory that you'll get an acceleration, but there are some criteria that you need to have been fulfilled before getting your accelerated assessment, and that too you'll be informed, or there will be a confirmation that will be sent that yes, you can go for accelerated assessment. So it's never mandatory. The second type of marketing authorization is the mutual recognition procedure, which was introduced in 1995 and was fully effective in January 1998. The mutual recognition procedure is where companies that have a medicine authorized in one EU member state can apply for this authorization to be recognized in other EU member countries. To be eligible, a medicinal product must have already received a marketing authorization in one member state at the time of application, which will be your reference member state. The application may be submitted to one or more member states, which will be your concerned member states. And the application must be identical, and all member states must be notified. So if you are selling a product in Ireland and you have a marketing authorization in Ireland and you want to sell the product in other countries like France, Germany, Netherlands, then Ireland will be your reference member state, and France, Germany, and Netherlands will be your concerned member states, and it can be in opposite direction as well. So that's how you decide when you want to go for mutual recognition procedure. So another kind of national procedure is decentralized procedure, which was introduced by 2001 review of medicinal legislation. The decentralized procedure is where companies can apply for simultaneous authorization of a medicine in more than one EU member state. And there are two things that you need to keep in mind for decentralized procedure. That first, it you shouldn't have any marketing authorization in any EU country before applying decentralized procedure. Second, it shouldn't fall within the scope of centralized procedure. So those are the two mandatory things. It's only possible if the medicinal product has not received an marketing authorization at the time of application. So if it's afterward, that's fine. And it should be initiated by the applicant under Article 28 of Directive 2001/83/EC. And in this case, the applicant chooses the reference member state and your concerned member states. In decentralized procedure, it's a three-step procedure. First is the pre-procedural step. Second is your assessment step 1. Third is your assessment step 2. And the significant difference from mutual recognition procedure is the consultations between the member states before the first marketing authorization is issued. So, what are the pros of mutual recognition procedure and the decentralized procedure? It's basically administrative procedures which are well defined and it gives notice to applicants, and you have a coordination group for the mutual recognition and decentralized procedures, and also you have a comprehensive best practice guides. So it's kind of well defined. Another pro of mutual recognition and decentralized procedure is exchange of information. So there is utranet or utralink which has all the information for all the MRPs and DCPs, which you can follow when you are applying for MRP and DCP. And then you have your CTS, which is the communication and tracking system, as the centralized database for tracking applications, comments, contents of variation, etc. So basically, it's kind of you know what's going on when you're applying for MRP and TCP. It's not like you don't know anything and then suddenly you have something like a paper which says, okay, you don't have a marketing authorization. It doesn't go in that way. It's just you have exchange of information at every stage. But what are the cons of MRP and TCP? It's basically the clinical practice varies. Then you have inconsistent assessment depending on the assessor. So if you have assessor who doesn't like you, then you have inconsistent assessment. You also have difficulty in contacting assessors to resolve issues. So you can't go back to the assessor and just confirm, oh, I didn't mean to say that, but it just means this. There's no such procedure like that. There's a communication between experts in the working parties and assessors, so that sometimes can be tricky. There is a specific national requirement irrespective of the existing guidelines, so that needs to be kept in mind. It depends on, like, if you want to sell your product in France, there will be specific national guidance of France, so that you need to worry about when you're dealing in France. And it might be very different from Ireland because they have different food allergies and maybe different kind of medicine allergies depending on people. So that's one thing you need to keep in mind. And then uh, the most important point here is companies really rely on the reference member state. So if a reference member state doesn't like you, then you won't be able to get, or you can have difficulty to get your marketing authorization. So that's another con when you're going for these kind of marketing authorization procedures. There are a few strategies that you can keep in mind before bringing a drug to market. First is the type of application. So if you have a drug that falls under mandatory scope of centralized procedure, then you have to go for centralized. Otherwise, you can decide depending upon the legal basis which other marketing authorization you can use. The second strategy here would be your market consideration. So if you're going for all EU member states or just limited countries, then you have to decide on that. There is a process to expand later where you have to repeat your mutual recognition procedure. And again, when you're going for decentralized procedure, you need to target your main markets. You again you can repeat mutual recognition to add more member states, but first you need to target the main markets. Then there comes the capability of the organization and also the ability to market the drug throughout EU. So depending upon that, you can decide if it's going to be centralized or if it's going to be mutual recognition. And if you don't have any marketing authorization, you can also go for decentralized procedure. Third strategy would be your fees. Centralized procedure has only one fee, but mutual recognition and decentralized procedure fees is depending upon the number of member states you are going for. The fees for human medicines, where an application gives a full dossier, is 291,800 euros for a single strength associated with one pharmaceutical form in one presentation. There can be additional fees, which is 29,300 euros for additional strength or pharmaceutical form, including one presentation submitted at the same time as the initial application for authorization. And another additional fee would be 7,300 euros for each additional presentation of same strength and pharmaceutical form submitted at the time as the initial application for authorization. So need to keep the fees in mind and then go for the type of procedure you want. The fourth strategy would be your timelines. So centralized procedure has a timeline of 210 days. There can be accelerated assessment, which reduces the number from 210 days to 150 days. Then your mutual recognition has national time. So if you go for one member state, which would be a reference member state, it includes that time plus 90 days. So which would be again around same time as centralized procedure. And even decentralized procedure has 210 days of timelines. So depending upon how fast you need your marketing authorization, you need to decide on the timelines. The fifth strategy would be the flexibility in naming your product. In centralized procedure, you can only have one name. But if you want to have the flexibility in naming your product, you need to go for mutual recognition or decentralized procedure where you have different names in different member states. Then your sixth strategy would be depending upon the special cases. So if you're going for conditional approval or exceptional circumstances, then you need to only go for centralized procedure. Although this shouldn't be mistaken for an easier option when in fact data are deficient, there's a need that sufficient data are provided for positive risk or benefits, and conditional when you're considering conditional approval, the conditions imposed should be met at all times. The last strategy would be when you're considering different member state or not. So like in centralized procedure, the applicant cannot choose the wrapper, but in your mutual recognition procedure or your decentralized procedure, the applicant can choose the reference member state. It's chosen based on the scientific expertise, availability, or the supportive of your product during scientific advice. So it all depends on that. So you have flexibility when you want to choose your repo. Just to summarize on the regulatory routes for marketing authorization of drugs, there are four different kinds of marketing authorization: national, mutual recognition, decentralized procedure, or centralized procedure, which differs on the number of member states. Like if it's only one member state, then it's a national license. If it's at least two member states and there is one member state, if you have the national license, then you go for mutual recognition procedure. Otherwise, you go for decentralized procedure. And if you want to go and sell your product in all member states, then you need to go for centralized procedure. Another difference here would be the type of drug you're selling. So if it's a new drug or if it's a known drug, the procedure changes. Then you have the timeline that you need to keep in mind when going for different procedures. So when you're going for national procedure like in Ireland, HPRA, you have to wait for 210 days to get your marketing authorization. In the case of mutual recognition, it's only 90 days. But in decentralized procedure and centralized procedure, there is a clock of time as well, which is not considered in between your processing times. And finally, on the basis of the assessors, there's difference between these procedures. Like if it's a national, it will be a national assessment, or if it will be a concerned member assessment based on the reference member assessment, or like in the case of decentralized procedure, a parallel assessment goes on between the reference member state and the concerned member state. And in centralized procedure, the assessment is by repo or co-repo, plus from voluntary and expert comments that are given in case of centralized procedure. So yeah, that's the summary.